County Board of Commissioners meeting to order. We'll stand for the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Well, good morning, everybody, and everybody who is watching. It is May 16th, second meeting of the month for the Kaneohe County Board of Commissioners. And board members, you all received our your packet electronically. And the first item of business is the consent agenda. Is there anything? Well, let me read the items on the consent agenda. We have the approval of the May 2nd minutes. We have the approval of the auditor's warrants. We have the approval of human services warrants and claims also for the auditor. And then the cancellation of human services warrants. Is there anything you wish to pull from the consent agenda?
Mr. Chair, you have
they're consent agenda policies. There are two more items, but they're under policies. The county burial policy, and then interactive video for case management is a fairly routine procedure that they needed to have done. So again, is there anything you wish to pull from the consent agenda? If not, I would entertain a motion to approve the consent agenda.
Mr. Chair, I'll make a motion that we approve the consent agenda.
Commissioner Dwayne Anderson moves. Do I hear a second?
I'll second it.
Commissioner Dale Anderson seconds. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Thank you. All right, under general business discussions and updates, the first item is the Greater Minnesota Family Services contract. As you recall, last month we tabled that motion for till today, to move on today. And Administrator Baker's got some background you're going to provide. Oh, no, I'm sorry. Kathy's going to do that. Thank you, Kathy, and welcome.
Hey, good morning.
Good morning.
So,
For the public and for the record, we state your name and...
Yep, sorry about that. Kathy Nelson. I work with Kaneohe County Health and Human Services in the Children's Division. Okay. Greater Minnesota Family Services had asked for an increase, and I know that was brought here for consideration for a contract addendum at your last meeting, and you tabled it for today. I understand there was some concern in it because of the significance of the increase. So I did go back to Mr. Doobie. We had quite extensive conversations about the increase and what the increase was really about and if there's a way to do something different within that, okay? So he came back with a 12% instead of the 16%. That would lead to a rate for Kaneohe County kids of $258.98 a day. For all other, $292.05. It fits still, even his other rate fit within what other facilities are charging. Greater Minnesota Shelter has lost a lot of staff this last year due to their inability to pay them. This is what the hope is to be able to pay them a better salary. They hire a lot of people. There's a lot of training that goes into these people because they have to have a good mental health understanding. As you're aware, many of our kids that go into placement, even if they don't have a specific mental health diagnosis, they're dealing with a variety of mental health concerns, behavioral issues, and other things that are going on for them. The other reason it's so important, not only that he needs to maintain staff and quality staff, is we have a weekend truancy program there that I helped develop 20 years ago, and it continues, and it's a really important program. It meets a lot of our needs in Kaneohe County. Or was it 20 years ago? But it was quite a while ago. Anyway, he has not been able to meet all of our needs within that program because he doesn't have enough staff. Right now, they have 10 children there. They have room for 17, but they can't. They cannot put more children in because they do not have staff to cover all the shifts. I did get a email from the shelter yesterday saying, please just let them know if we need truancy. They will try to see if they can get extra staff in on the weekends to help with that, but they're really at a crunch. So it really is important we look to give them this increase in order to be able to staff well because we need the program, okay? So your question may be, how is this going to impact us financially? Well, last year we had 10 kids that were able to be served. We probably had more, but 10 were actually able to go there. This type of increase, they had 704 total days for those 10 kids. It would be about $19,000, a little bit more, $19,500, of an increase for us on our budget overall. Now, if they can meet more of our needs, one of the things you need to consider is if we are traveling out of town, then you have a social worker, because they have to see each of these kids every month. So then they're driving to see those children, which put more cost on our county for gas mileage, social worker hours out of the office, et cetera. So we really have to try to support our local programs, and I know Prairie Lakes, it's important for us to be able to support them too and place as many kids locally as we're able. Sometimes we're not able because they can't meet all of our needs. But if we can get the hiring, help them so that they can hire more staff, I think we'll be able to meet more of our needs. That's all I have.
So, as I recall, it wasn't so much as a question of whether or not there was any increase warranted. It was more of just, we were a little confused as to what it is. So can I ask a question? What we're presenting today and considering today is the same as what we were looking at? It is not, okay.
No, it's 12% instead of
thought the number was
16%.
the same, so-
What the hope is if they can hire enough staff to stay at a higher capacity, they won't have the same losses.
Right.
They could eliminate a lot of their loss just by being able to have more people and fill their beds. They haven't been able to fill their beds. They've been averaging between 8 and 10 kids this past year instead of 17.
Sure. So you heard the recommendation from Ms. Nelson.
Could I ask a question? So, I'm kind of confused. You're talking about truancy. So are they placed there by the courts or?
Yes.
Okay, and then if we can't take them in, where do they go?
Well, a lot of times, if it's the weekend truancy, they're the only program that offers that for us. So then we hang on to it and try to do other things until we're able to fulfill that order.
So are they there just during the weekend then?
Most of our truant youth just go for the weekends. Once in a while, if they're not successful, the judge may order a longer term.
Okay, where are they the other times? Are they with their parents
Family.
or family? Okay, okay.
The idea behind the program was, if we spoil their weekends, maybe they'll go to school during the week.
I see, okay.
And you show up Friday night, you pick them up.
So the reason why they're there is they aren't going to school or?
Correct, truancy. Yep. We do have kids go to shelter for other reasons. They do a 30-day eval for us.
Okay,
They do some other programming for us. So it isn't just truancy, but the truancy right now, they're not able to meet our needs. And we have several kids ordered into weekend truancy that aren't fulfilling their court order. Just plain and simple, there's no way we can do it.
okay.
You know, members of the board, let's revert back to the order and entertain a motion, and then we'll have the discussion, all right? So I'd entertain a motion on this contract.
I will so move approval of the contract.
Commissioner Gardner moves on the
Staff.
contract. Do I hear a second?
Mr. Chair. Oh, go ahead.
Commissioner
Go
Berg.
ahead.
Okay, Commissioner Berg moves on the second, and then I think Commissioner Berg had, or one of you, go, I don't care.
Were you, I think he was, Commissioner Anderson was ahead of me.
Thanks.
Then me is, yeah.
I guess my question is there staffing issues across the whole state, or is it more just our area that's having the biggest problem with staffing? I mean, I know it's tough to get staffing, but I'm just wondering if it's a statewide issue or if it's just a local issue more than that.
It's a statewide issue. Everybody's having problems hiring enough people to do the jobs. I think, as you're aware, every industry is suffering right now. However, I think any of our human service, it's maybe compounded because of the types of situations we're dealing with on a day-to-day basis.
Commissioner,
Mr. Chair, thank you. Thank you for the update. I think last meeting we just had some general questions about what's going on, and I think you answered most of them already, that as we realize, COVID has affected so many things in so many different ways, and all these different programs because of COVID are now really, everybody's arguing over who can we get to from somebody else to work in our program, type of thing. And they're really struggling, and I understand that, and that's helped clarify that a lot. You mentioned the truancy program. That's not part of
What?
they're not part of this per diem, though, right? Or is that is part of their
Yeah,
program?
so if they
They're
stay one
in-house,
day, it's that 200 and, was it 58?
Yeah.
Yeah.
58 or
That is
So
part-
whether they go for the truancy, then there would be 2 days of payment toward that.
So if they go, okay, because part of that program, then they're housed for
Yeah.
that.
And then depending on how long they stay on Sunday, it could be 2 or 3 days.
Okay. Well, it'd be interesting to have a little bit more update on that program someday, too. Yeah.
any other
I
questions?
didn't understand that. All these programs are a little bit different in so many different ways and what services they provide. Thank you.
Commissioner Gardner.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. To that point, outside of the truancy program, tell us a little bit, please, about the remainder of what it is that this program does, and specifically the kids that we're working with, because I imagine this is about what everybody talks about is a continuum of care, and if this is not able to continue, it leaves a hole in that continuum, correct?
Correct. Greater Minnesota Shelter offers a variety of programs. You know, the title shelter has the typical definition might be short-term. Yet they do keep children longer. So they'll do a 30-day eval. We get that evaluation, and that evaluation may recommend a variety of things for the child and the family. They will continue to serve that child, and the child may be there 3, 4, 5 months. They're not as long-term as some of the typical places we might send a child to where they're there 9 months, a year, where they're more residential treatment. Typically 4 or 5 months might be a pretty standard, and they do some then follow-up with the family after the child leaves. The same, hopefully, provider that might be connecting with the child in the home on a therapeutic basis would then carry over to connect with the family on that same therapeutic basis.
So to follow up, are these children then with severe and persistent mental illness diagnoses, or is that, or do you have, or are they perhaps a step below that? Explain for us what that.
They might have an SED statement, but they're probably not to the level of needing residential treatment facilities like your North Homes or some of those other places that really have intensive psychiatric care and they're at more of a breaking point from a mental health standpoint. These kids, they have mental health needs many times or behavioral needs, but they're at a more treatable level, without needing the intensive services, if that makes sense.
Sure. And one last follow-up. Previously, you had recommended the 16% increase.
Yep.
I personally did not have a problem with that increase. I would rather err a little on the side of caution here and make sure that this program is funded to the original request. I would amend my motion to go back to what was presented to us at the last meeting, the 16%, and fulfill that request.
So there's an amendment on the floor. Do I hear a second to the amendment?
And I had asked Kelsey if she had those rates for us.
So the proposed rates at the May 2nd board meeting were $268.61 per day and $302.48 per day, $10 more of what was presented today.
So again, we have an amendment on the floor. Do I hear a second?
I'll second it just for discussion.
So we have a second. Any discussion? Yeah, discussion on the amendment.
Well, since this is a, how much percent increase then? That'll be an
16 instead of 12.
16.
total, including the 6% plus,
No,
Basically, it amounts to about, as Kelsey said.
22%.
10, well, no, 16, correct?
it's on top of the 6, right, or not? Yeah, so it's 22%.
Overall.
Okay.
And that's 16 on top of 6, and so it's, you just don't add those two together, it's compounded. It's not major, but it's more than 22% even.
It's $10 a day more.
Any other discussion? Then we will vote on the amendment. All in favor of the amendment signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Right.
We'll do a roll call. Commissioner Dale Anderson,
Aye.
Commissioner Berg,
Nay,
Commissioner Gardner,
Aye.
Commissioner Dwayne Anderson.
Nay.
Imdick votes nay. So the amendment fails, and now we'll vote on the original motion. All in favor of the original motion for a 12% increase signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Thank you, Kathy. And please, it was more of a misunderstanding and a confusion than any opposition to fairly treating these services. They're much needed, and if you see Mr. Doobie, pass on our appreciation, because we simply don't have the facilities to put them in if we didn't have these contracted
Exactly.
facilities available. So
Could I say one thing then, Mr.
Sure.
Chair? So I just would like more information. Maybe sometime we could do, I don't know if it's we could put it in one of our workshops or something that we do in the future, and so I can learn more about it before.
And
That's why I'm hesitant to give even more money about something I don't know a lot about, so.
And it's also helpful, I think, sometimes to put a face in it together with the name, because, we're talking about things that, I know George, but I don't know if anybody else has met George, so.
Mr. Chair,
Yes,
yes.
go ahead.
I'm very well their program, and it's a very important program. We do want to keep that program in our community on many different levels, and we want to be supportive of our businesses. But I do feel that what we decided upon is a very, very healthy increase, and we'll see how that goes. And we can always review that as time comes up. So there was an agreement on it, and I think we did well. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
thank you.
Kathy.
Have a good day.
Thank you.
All right. Gary, we have a solid waste collection license.
That is correct. Gary Gear, Kennewick County Environmental Services Director, here before you this morning with one license application that our office received, and it was from Purple Roll-Off LLC out of Glencoe, Minnesota. Minimal number of roll-offs that he has, but in his growth and within his radius of home base, he was just desiring and visiting with him to offer some services here or be able to cover if he received a call. He's primarily out of Glencoe and goes towards the metro, but because of the area of availability, and he was willing and wanting to make applications, so if the call came in, he could provide services. So everything, the license application is complete, and staff would be recommending approval of the application as presented.
So you heard Mr. Gear about the license application. How do you wish to proceed?
Mr. Chair, I would move to accept.
Commissioner Dale Anderson moves. Do I hear a second?
I'll second that.
Commissioner Dwayne Anderson seconds. Any discussion? I have just a question. We're just talking roll-offs and not the 3-yard dumpsters or 2-yard or whatever they are?
Correct, that's what I
So
understand.
largely for demo and.
Yes.
So where would the waste go that is collected?
I would anticipate he would come to our facility.
If
because
it's collected in Kennewick County, it
Yes.
goes,
Yeah.
it's because of freight?
Yes,
Okay,
correct.
all right, thank you. Any other questions? All in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Would you like to sign?
I can do that right now. Just the one spot? Yes. Does Kelsey need to sign too? Oh, no, that was my agenda.
Take the agenda.
How's off? All right. We had a planning commission meeting last week, and we have several items for approval today. Eric Van Dyking, the zoning administrator, welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the board. I am indeed with you before you with some requests from the Planning Commission, and Eric Van Dyken, as you noted, County Planning and Zoning Administrator. And we met as a Planning Commission last Monday, the 8th of May, and there were 6 different requests that came before the Planning Commission at that time, and I will step through them in order. The first is a request from Verizon Wireless for a monopole communication tower. This is up south of Nest Lake. And this is actually a permit that was previously granted nearly 5 years ago. The location has changed a little bit from what was a knob up near County Road 32, but now has been moved back onto the property a little bit further to what they deem to be a little bit better location. And so the Planning Commission does recommend approval of this request. They did not deem any conditions necessary, but the findings are before you in the minutes.
So we'll act on these one at a time. I think we have a total of 5 today, right?
6.
6, okay. And so I'd entertain a motion to approve the first request for the Verizon tower.
No, so move.
Commissioner Gardner moves. Do I hear a second? I will second that. And citing the staff recommendation or findings and conditions if they exist. And I would just take a moment here before, I think it's safe for us to assume on every one of our approvals that we cite the staff findings and the conditions, unless otherwise. Is that fair enough with you guys? Is that legal?
I would suggest, and County Attorney Baker can weigh in on this, but I would suggest that the best policy is always to be explicit. I do think that we're something to be challenged and a recording to be referenced. If it wasn't explicit, there might be a question on that matter. And I think being explicit, the court would be able to see that the will of the board was very clear that they were adopting these findings as presented and
And I will
conditions.
stand corrected.
But to that point, I will amend my motion to accept the, to approve the application and accept the findings as presented.
And I will accept that as a friendly amendment, being the seconder. Any other questions? All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and Attorney Baker can feel free to correct me
I
there.
saw a
if
head nod over there.
I
So
overextended. In the trainings we go through, the attorneys that often represent counties will usually beg you to be as explicit as you can possibly be. It places them in the best position should there be a challenge. The second application is that of Kyle Weber. Kyle Weber operates in the Hillcrest area up on Highway 71 in a commercial district. He is currently permitted for several types of business on his property there. Specifically, he runs a construction business and he sells with his son certain attachments for skid steers. At this time, he's looking to add sales of sheds and some off and on equipment that he runs into, but mainly the biggest thing was that he wants to sell trailers and needs a dealer's license to do that. And of course, with that always comes a sign off with the state for zoning compliance. So that triggered him to come in, ask to have his, essentially his conditional use added to with these additional uses. The Planning Commission does recommend approval with 7 attached conditions in the findings as you see in the minutes.
So you heard the staff recommendation for the Kyle Weber application. How do you wish to proceed?
Go ahead. Mr. Chair, I recommend we approve the 7 conditions and the facts and the 8 facts and findings that we have on this proposal.
There, we have a motion to approve the application. Do I hear a second?
I'll second.
Commissioner Gardner seconds. Any discussion? I would just say that Commissioner Dale Anderson and I drive by that facility on a very frequent basis, and it's about 2 years old now, maybe 3, that they started developing that commercially, and they've done a very nice, neat job of it. So, I think it's a good additional business to the area.
Nope.
All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The third request is at a site that you all will likely recognize as a site that we've been looking at and trying to find the right business, I guess, established in there. This is a request from A&A Minnesota Properties. You would better know them regionally as Hinterlands Winery. This is a business generally located out of the Clara City area, and they've been looking to spread their wings just a little bit. You may also recall that we did approve them at a different location, and that location will be soon before you for a different use. Essentially, what they're hoping to do in this, the old Long Lake Antiques business building near Long Lake, is to operate part of their processing. Their goal at this point is to stay away from retail and hospitality, which is what they were thinking they were going to concentrate on more, and they want to stick more with their bolstering their wholesale distribution. This will be part of their wholesale distribution. Specifically, they will be looking to do mainly their packaging there, bottling and canning, both of wine and also of hard cider products. There will be no on-site sales here, no hospitality, fairly minimal traffic in and out. The township expressed the desire for some conditions, most of which were overlapped by the staff proposed conditions. And the main thing that we sorted through again was trying to make sure that the road and how we come in and out of there, how they access it, is not unsafe and doesn't impede traffic flow. And so the Planning Commission does unanimously recommend approval of this request with 10 attached conditions and the findings as you see in the minutes.
You heard Mr. Van Dyken's recommendation. How do you wish to proceed?
Mr. Chair, I'll make a motion that we approve, what is it, A&A?
A&A,
I gotta
yes.
try. A&A Minnesota Properties LLC with the attached conditions and findings.
Commissioner Dwayne Anderson moves on A&A application. Do I hear a second?
I'll second it.
Commissioner Dale Anderson seconds. Any further discussion? I would just add, as a member of the Planning and Zoning, there was quite a bit of discussion over this because there was some concern about the previous conditions that had been placed on the application when Mr. Strayling was going to run it as a home base, or not a home base, but a base for his operation. Can you just?
Wait, Mr. Chair, this is the winery, or
That is correct.
Yeah, okay.
I'm just going back and saying there was quite a bit of discussion about, did the previous, because the neighbors were all concerned about the stipulations that had been placed on the previous one, and did they still apply? And most of them weren't even pertinent, but the few that were, you want to touch on that just a little bit?
Yeah, I would note that most of these conditions are reflective of the same conditions, especially as it comes to road and use of the road. One of the things that was removed was the requirement for screening on a parking area. Mr. Strayling, when he was proposing a business there, had significant more outside presence, shall we say, trailers and some equipment, et cetera, that he proposed to store in a side lot. And given the residential nature of the area and some of the concerns expressed to the Planning Commission and subsequently the County Board did deem it desirable to screen some of that, shall we say, more intense and obvious visibility there. Having none of that type of impact with this business, that was not proposed by staff, and the Planning Commission did not bring up or revive that condition. But most of the other ones are fairly similar to what Mr. Strayling had been asked to operate under.
Okay. Any other questions or comments? All in favor of the application signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Then we switch gears to here, essentially what we're seeing is a land swap. A&J Rentals, who had owned or does own or is in a process of selling to A&A or Hinterlands, the Long Lake Antiques business, ended up finding that after getting approval to operate there, that it was really a bit of a tight quarters for him. And I think he just became dissatisfied with his ability to operate out of there the way he would like. And so now we have a proposal from A&J Rentals, which is Mr. Strailing, to establish a different base of operations, this being in a commercial industrial district on land that is owned by A&A Minnesota Property. So essentially what we're seeing is a land swap here between these two parties. This is where Hinterlands had originally proposed to do some larger hospitality. They were going to get into more hosting of events, a restaurant, et cetera, and the costs ended up being just not bearable for them. They decided it was not going to be a good business decision for them. So they are selling their site to Mr. Strailing. He's selling his site to them. And he's finding that he can now then develop this site from scratch in a commercial zone where he's going to have the elbow room that he needs to operate his business better. So the Planning Commission was pleased to hear that, did recommend approval with 7 attached conditions and the findings as you see in the minutes.
So you heard the staff recommendation on A&J Properties? Do I have the
A&J Rentals.
A&J Rentals? How do you wish to proceed?
Mr. Chair, I will move approval of the A&J Rentals application with the attached conditions and findings.
Commissioner Gardner moves on the application. Do I hear a second?
I'll second that.
Commissioner Dwayne Anderson seconds. Any discussion? I would just say that I think this is a great resolution to the issue. I think and the reason I asked the question on the previous application is that I think some of the landowners or neighbors were a little concerned that should the winery thing not work out, then we're back to where we were at. But with the trading and the transfer of properties back and forth, I don't think they'll ever have to worry about that. And I think A&J Rentals will be in a better spot, as far as their elbow room is concerned and egress and all of that. So I think they worked out a good deal.
Mr. Chair, I'd just like to really thank the planning committee as well as everybody else involved. This turned out to be kind of a win-win situation now, a lot better than we were at before, especially when we look at the citizens who live there and the businesses that do a good business. And I think we're whole again here on this.
Yep, I would agree. Any other comments or questions? If not, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll note before I get into these last 2 applications that in the testimony of our final application on a community solar garden, these last 2 are both community solar gardens, there was a citizen that came forward with a concern over what he understood to be a statewide prohibition on locating solar facilities on what he termed tillable ag land. And the Planning Commission asked me about that. I indicated that I was not aware of anything, and certainly there's been a pretty long history in our own county of approving them on agricultural land as well as on a statewide basis. But I was asked by the Planning Commission to go ahead and seek a little further counsel on that. I told him I would consult with County Attorney Baker, and I've had the chance to do that. Shane, would you like to address that yourself, or would you want me to sum it up?
Well, in short, there's no general prohibition. Actually, there are a number of statutes that provide it as an exception or specifically talk about that they can be limitations. Of course, if the statute puts in that you may limit, means it's not generally prohibited in the first instance. And one particular statute that was of interest was regarding agricultural preservation property. So there's a program out there for preserving land, and even that's an exception within that is to have solar power of a certain level.
So go ahead and.
Very good. So I believe that that concern has been addressed, and it is well within the legal authority of the county to establish or allow these to occur on ag land, even prime ag land. So with that background, I would proceed to request number 5 is that of Lake Lillian Solar LLC. Now, this is another renewal, essentially, of a permit previously granted. What we're seeing a little bit in the solar industry is that because there's a rush, there's a little bit of a bottleneck on supply. And so we have an ordinance stipulation that if a CUP is not used within a year, it goes null and void. And so we are having a couple solar facilities that are bumping up against that timeline, and they're needing to come in for a approval. And so this is a reapproval just southwest of Lake Lillian on the north side of Highway 7. The Planning Commission, as per their original recommendation, again recommends approval with 2 attached conditions and the findings as you see.
You heard the recommendation from zoning. How do you wish to proceed on Lake Lillian Solar Garden?
Mr. Chair, I'll make a motion that we approve Lake Lillian Solar application with the conditions and findings.
Commissioner Dwayne Anderson moves. Do I hear a second?
I'll second it.
Commissioner Dale Anderson seconds.
And then I have a question then.
Go ahead.
So where is this one located in proximity to the one that was permitted like about 3 years ago?
I think I had the map in the file. So from the one on, that was permitted 3 years ago by, I don't forget their name, it starts with a P.
I'm not sure of the name.
I'm sorry if I'm getting that. It's about, I would say, 3/4 of a mile to the east.
Okay.
You remember those old, perhaps turkey barn or poultry barns that are the Quonset style? Just a little bit east of there.
Okay, now, all right, thanks.
All right, any other questions? If not, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Then the final request here is a new solar facility. This one was originally given to the zoning office and then pulled back for a slight repositioning, and now is here before you. It's located a little bit further off Highway 7, but in the same Xcel Energy corridor with their main line coming up and down Highway 7. That's where we're seeing the pressure for these 1 megawatt community solar gardens. This is on land owned by Merle and Patty Post. And it is also a 1 megawatt facility. We did have a little more discussion on this one, and I wanted to highlight one thing. I've been able to consult over time with Val Swore, the county assessor, on the question of property valuation. It's something that comes up pretty regularly with this. People have concerns about, hey, if people don't like the look of these, is my property value going to go down? And that's certainly a concern for some people, and it was brought up in this. Val has consistently held that their observations as they track sales, et cetera, is that these type of facilities have had no impact on the market value. And so we do note that a little bit in finding number 1, specifically that talks about impact to property values, and our goal of looking at making sure we do not approve things that are negatively impacting people's property values. So with that background and on the discussion, I note that the Planning Commission also recommends approval with the same 2 conditions and findings as in the minutes.
So you heard the staff recommendations on Ringo Garden LLC Solar. How do you wish to proceed?
Mr. Chair, I'll make a motion that we approve Ringo Garden application with the conditions and findings as listed.
Commissioner Dwayne Anderson moves. Do I hear a second?
I'll second.
Commissioner Gardner seconds. Any questions or comments? Go ahead, Mr. Gardner.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Eric, just going back to that supposed state statute, I think the people around Byron Minnesota would be really surprised to hear of a prohibition, because there's a massive solar project that's just recently been approved down there, and I don't remember how many acres it was, but I want to say it's 1,000 or more acres. And essentially the landowners, this is another revenue stream for them. This is no different than diversifying crops for them. So, it's just something that we're going to continue to see as the need for alternative energy increases.
If I may, in the research on whether there was law out there, one thing I came across was a journal article. That kind of the premise is what Commissioner Gardner's talked about. It's like the new crop is kind of what they're saying. It's new way to use the agricultural land because it meets the needs for solar. It's flat, it's open space, it allows for the collection of solar.
Any other comments or questions? Commissioner
Just a question, just to review, I lose kind of track. How many solar setups do we have in Kennewick County at this point? Do you know off the top of your head? Seems like there's been quite a few recently.
I would say
Just a guesstimate.
near about 10 of the 1 megawatt facilities. We've had one of those, or probably 2 of them that never did get built, and I've not heard back from them. And then we have the larger one that's part of the Aurora project just outside of Atwater there. That was a PUC, or Public Utilities Commission permitted project because they roped it in with a larger project. But yeah, we're around that area. Certainly not the type of pressure that we see up on the I-94 corridor, but more than others are getting. And I expect there will be a limiting factor, probably based on Excel area. This particular program is an Excel mandated program from the PUC. And I don't know fully what their line capacity is for that, but certainly we know they aren't everywhere in the county, so.
Oh, thank you.
And of course, Commissioner Anderson and Commissioner Imdick have these huge arrays on our property that don't even get counted in there. We have small arrays. Commissioner Anderson.
So, for, as far as property taxes, these are the ones, they still fit under the rural ag type classification, correct? And then once they get over, like the larger ones, they're taxed at a different rate, I believe. Am I correct, or?
I would have to defer to the assessors, county assessor on that.
I think the larger ones are more of a commercial type assessment, if I understand right, but.
Thank you for asking
Nice to
that.
have
I
him
had
in.
the same question, and I think Val's going to be here later, so we can,
Okay.
if you remember, we can ask that question. And to the point of land use, I don't know if that argument's ever going to go away. I was at an AMC Futures meeting last week, and we had a presentation by a company that is in the green energy, Extra Green, I think they were called. And one of the members of the audience brought up the land use, and so one of the things that has always been a concern is that that's needed to feed the world, right? But there's also the question of property rights and who gets to tell you what to do with your property. So I don't think it's going to go away right away, but we should acknowledge it. I appreciate that. Commissioner Anderson?
I guess one thing that I think about, and I was thinking about it sitting here, and I see it's in the condition, so I know it's addressed, but I guess my concern is in the future, at some point in time when this is not a feasible way to produce electricity, the decommissioning thing scares me a little bit, that we're going to have all this metal sitting out there that has to get pulled up and the wire that's all buried in the ground. But I mean, you've got that addressed in the condition, so I know it's addressed, but that's my concern.
All right, so we have a motion and a second. I believe we have a motion, don't we?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Thank you. Eric, you have one more presentation for it. You're going to switch gears now. right?
Yes, if I may quickly, just give you a quick update on our Central Minnesota River Watershed Partnership. You may historically know this better as the Hawk Creek Watershed because it also contains part of a different watershed. When we switched from the planning phase to the implementation phase, it was given more of a regional name. So it's Central Minnesota River. We are through the planning process. We are into the implementation process of our first biennial budget. It's called a biennial budget, but it's actually a 3-year grant. We will be using what the state calls, or what Board of Water and Soil Resource call watershed-based implementation funding, or WBIF. And this is non-competitive money. So they say, when you've planned properly, we're going to give you a certain amount of money. You don't have to compete and scrabble with other jurisdictions for it. We're going to give it to you, and then you're expected to spend it according to how you've planned to spend it. And so we're in what I would say, the exciting stage of not just meeting to meet and plan, but we're meeting to talk about the improvements that we get to make now with this money. So, from a staff level, we find a lot more pleasure in that portion than we do in the endless planning. So an update that I can give you is that in a fairly short period of time, the majority of the money in our first biennial budget is essentially spoken for. We have a handful of smaller projects. The policy in this partnership is that projects under $75,000 can be approved at the staff level. They go through a process of what we might say grading. It's a scoring and ranking sheet that we put it through, and it pops out an answer on the other end. Should we fund it, and at what level should it be funded? And then when we're above $75,000, we come back to our Joint Powers Board, and they consider the proposal, and they vote on that. We did just have a meeting with the Joint Powers recently, and they had two larger projects on there. The first of which was a project out at the Conroe County Fairgrounds for some significant stormwater improvements. And that, I think the project portion that would be funded through the watershed-based implementation funding was around $175,000. And it was focusing on some stormwater settling coming off the raceway and other portions of the fairgrounds. Of course, very near the lake, and it's one of the lakes that's a priority in our plan to say, hey, we don't want to push this lake any harder. We need to restore this lake. And so that seems to be a good project, and the Joint Powers Board did approve that. The second large project is one that the Joint Powers Board perhaps had a little sticker shock with. I guess you could almost say Commissioner Berg is going to smile a little bit at that, perhaps, as he sits on that board, and there's a little discussion relating to the sum. And this is a project that covers 1,600 acres. So from a staff perspective, it's pretty exciting because it's a I don't want to say fully landscape scale, but it starts to be at the scale where we can turn the dial a little bit on how we're using the land. This is a proposal for conservation tillage and cover crops. It covers about 1,600 acres in one farming operation, and the 3-year cost is over $400,000. It's 140 some thousand per year over a 3-year cost share agreement. And it's exciting from the staff perspective because when we think about how can we really make a change, the structural practices such as restoring wetlands, building dikes, stabilizing stream banks, they feel a little more tangible sometimes, and we like to build things. But if we really hope to make a difference long-term on water quality, we have to do things on a larger scale as well. We have to do some of these non-structural things. We have to think about how we do what we do on the land, and that's where this type of project has some real strength to it, because when we see the soil health benefits and then the multiple benefits for water storage, for sediment reduction, for nutrient reduction, all those types of benefits we get off these practices. If we can change some of that over time, there's some real benefit to be found there. So the Joint Powers did approve that also after some discussion, and we'll see where it goes from there as we approach our second round of funding, which may be approved later on this year. And then we'll keep chugging along, but some exciting things happening there. Hopefully we'll continue to see projects be put on the land.
And there's no action call. You're not asking for any action today, just information.
No, Mr. Chair, just wanted to give you that update.
You have a question? Mr. Berg?
No, just a comment, if I may, Mr. Chair. Yes, I really actually want to give kudos to the staff of the Hawk Watershed Planning, and it was taking place. And we could move it so quickly and so fast on the needs out there and the priorities. And all these projects did meet our priorities that were set out. And I just thought it was really a good update to be at this stage and to hear these good things. And then also hear that there's a possibility of a second round of funding for it too. So Hot Creek One Watershed Plan project is up and running and moving right along really well. And thank you, Mr. Van Dyken, for all your work on that. And all the other people too. It was quite a team taking place there.
Any other questions or comments? I've got a couple. So when you said the ones that are over 75,000, I was part of the, one of the pilot projects in the North Fork, One Watershed, One Plan. There we set it at 50,000 that the technical panel could do without getting approval from the policy. So the plans that are being approved, and then in some cases have to be approved by the policy committee, they're still put together by the technical committee, right?
Yeah, so staff, so in the instance of, the Candy County one, Margaret Johnson and her staff at the Sound Water Conservation District, they've done all the legwork, all the approvals. They have the technical backing that's needed. The state has a whole guideline for what meets their standard for approvable projects. And same down in the project down in Renville County, Holly Hadlewick and her staff in particular have done all the legwork there. And we can be assured that they do yearly inspections and essentially recertifications. So this isn't a just go ahead and do it and there's no accountability. That's a big chunk of public money, and there's quite a bit of oversight that goes with that at the staff level. So a lot of staff work ahead of time, and then on the tail end, after approval ongoing, there'll be continued staff work to assure that the conservation benefits that we expect are actually being realized.
Yeah, and that was one of my questions, is who had made application to those, at least those two bigger projects. And I'm sure there's some smaller projects that other staff are involved with that probably won't even reach the level of our conversations. The other question I had is there any local funding requests that are to be expected of the partner counties in the Hot Creek program? I know in One Watershed, One Plan, there was a modest amount that we had to put in for administrative services mostly.
Yeah, so you have already given a small amount to cover some of the initial MCIT coverage, and then there will be an amount of requests coming out, I think, by August 1st, as it's dictated by the bylaws of the Joint Powers Board. There will be a two-part fee request. It's going to be $15,000 request, and what this money will cover several things. It will cover first some of the operating expenses, this MCIT insurance being the main one of that, and then also some accounting services. I believe it's through CDS. And then the other feature of this program from the state is that they give us this WBIF funding in a three-part series. It's a 50-40-10 formula. And what that means is that they give us 50% of the funding up front. We spend it. They give us the next 40%, we spend it, and then they're gracious enough to say, you have to spend the last 10% before we're going to give you that money back. So that's a refundable, not upfront money. And so what this money will also cover is that upfront cost that you'll keep getting paid back, and it'll always be your money and it'll always be there. And then I'll note, going forward, this Joint Powers Group has decided to put their money, the 50% that you get up front, they're already investing that. So they put in an investment account, and the goal and the hope is that that interest from that will pay the ongoing operating costs, your MCIT insurance, your accounting services, et cetera, so that there won't be continual asks on that. And so there was some wisdom and foresight there, and being responsible instead of just putting an account sitting on it. They have a good arrangement where they can access it quickly, but they are earning some interest on it, and that's already started to accrue, I think, at a fairly attractive amount. So you can take some comfort, I think, in knowing that there's going to be an ask up front here, but it's not going to be, hopefully, a continual, certainly not to that dollar amount.
Thank you for that explanation, because there's usually a little bit of financial strings attached, and You know, that sounds like a very reasonable approach, in my opinion, so.
Yep.
Any
Mr.
other?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, just to follow up on that, I believe we discussed that too before the board. I think we had a motion to go ahead and approve it. Did we not?
The
I'm looking at-
15?
Yeah, the 15.
I don't believe,
We
I'm
have-
not sure we
So we're
have
gonna
brought
put that
that
on the agenda.
specific.
Okay. I know we talked about
amount.
it briefly during the committee updates then.
Okay.
Okay. But, Mr. Chair, if I may follow up too, I also want to give a shout out to, you know, the technical committee you're talking about, but part of that as well as the other joint power board members, the SWCDs, or soil and water individuals, are very big players in this whole thing too. And really a good working relationship with all the different levels of Kansas County government taking place in the different areas. So it's going well.
All right, any other comments or questions? Then thank you very much for your update. We appreciate it.
Thank you for your time today.
Tammy Jo.
Good
I
morning.
scratched it off before and I'm looking for Val, but that was my fault, so.
No. Good morning, Tammy Jo Lieberg, Community Corrections Director. I'm here today just for a quick legislative update. I'm happy to report a little after midnight last night, the House passed the omnibus bill and we were included in that. So our bill went through the Senate and the House and it's on its way to the governor. So just a little quick reminder and discussion about what that means for us is, you know, as community corrections, our job is to address long-term community safety in the community. We supervise all of the probation and supervised release, which is parole, what most people understand as parole, for adults and juveniles in our county. That means holding offenders accountable, but also addressing long-term community safety through the process of rehabilitation and reducing recidivism. This part of the bill is historic for Kandiyohi County and for all of probation across the state. Our, you know, system is very complicated in the state of Minnesota, having 3 delivery systems where we started with the Department of Corrections, a county probation office, and then we have our community corrections, which is where we fall in the mix. Community corrections was started in 1976 at the state as an incentive program to encourage counties to take over supervision because the idea that local agencies have a better understanding of what our communities need. Since that time, the funding for that portion has slowly decreased, or not necessarily decreased, but it hasn't kept up with the needs. So for the last 15 years per se, we've been trying to figure out how do we address this. And what we started calling single funding formula about 15 years ago. We didn't get a lot of traction on it. We've gone lots of different directions, looking at working with American Parole and Probation Association and the Council of State Governments, and looking at what other systems do across the country. Last year, when we weren't successful with our bill, we actually, AMC, the Association of Minnesota Counties, took this up as a major, one of their priorities. And for the last year, I was meeting with county commissioners, and we had delivery system representatives from all 3 delivery systems, and then the American Parole and Probation Association, and we designed a formula that has equitable funding across all 3 delivery systems. There's been a couple hiccups in that, different ways, but just kind of going back to where we started. That committee looked at what other probation departments did across the country. One of the ones we modeled it after was actually Oregon. And then looked at what is our true costs, administrative costs, what's the state's responsibility, where do we need our funding to be? Because the state has the responsibility to provide funding for all felony supervision. That includes felony supervision on probation and felony supervision that would be supervised release or parole. And then half of that funding for gross misdemeanors and juveniles. And so we looked at what are all those options. The committee numbers, just for reference, started between $83 million statewide to $290 million increase statewide because of how underfunded probation has been over the last 25 years. We knew at that point that that was pretty much a tall ask to get to right off the bat. And so we started with that $83 million number. Our number didn't get there. We're at 46 million, but that is the biggest increase we've seen in over 20 years for probation funding. So and we have a formula, which means all of the delivery systems in the state of Minnesota, the Department of Corrections, county probation, and community corrections agencies will all be funded the same. That's huge for us. So the formula that we ended up with is $150,000 base funding for every county across the state. So that makes a big difference for our rural counties as we were looking at so many funding issues in the rural areas, just between the geography or just the idea of keeping the lights on were so expensive. We felt that we had the need for that. And then a capitated rate. That capitated rate can change over time, but that capitated rate looked at addressing what do we need for administrative support for our probation officers, along with what types of probation, having probation officers do evidence-based practices in the field. The focus is how do we move probation and supervised release into today with evidence-based practices. So that is essentially priority for us. What does that mean for us in Kandiyohi County? Our priority, as we've talked about a couple different times last year, our priority in community corrections was really to develop cognitive behavioral intervention groups, which we've been very successful at, where we have a moving on group, we have a community engagement group, we have lots of thinking for a change, we have a severe and persistent mentally ill group, we have lots of groups to help reduce recidivism. This year, our focus has really been on how do we do interventions and looking at increasing field visits on an individual basis. Next year, with this increase in funding, we're really going to concentrate on how do we provide quality assurance for all of those models. We've done a really good job of implementing these new programs, but what does that mean for training, for coaching, and making sure that our staff are really doing all of these things at the quality level? This came through last night, so we don't have definite plans, but we have been planning a little bit in advance, don't want to go too far without knowing where we were going to end up. But really, some of that means, added supervision for a coaching model, having an EBP coordinator potentially. Another area that we know that we're really severely lacking in is as we've been concentrating on a lot of these things, we don't have a lot of clerical support. If we look at our neighbors in Department of Corrections, they run 1 support staff to every 4 probation officers. Right now, I'm running 1 to about 12. So there's areas that we can increase by increasing our clerical and our supports behind our probation officers. It gives them the time to really do what we need to do to reduce recidivism and address community safety. Other parts of the omnibus bill, just kind of to throw out so that everybody is aware, is we have the Department of Corrections is looking at increasing funding for supervision in tribal areas. Actually, tribes would be able to either develop their own community corrections agency, or that they can have funding to add to the community correction agencies or Department of Corrections that's servicing their area. They're looking at adding an EBP unit, and they also included the MMRA as part of the process, which I'm not sure if everybody's familiar with, but the commissioner's plan is to actually reduce the amount of prison time to 50% for individuals that have completed treatment while they're in prison, which is a great idea, but just so everybody's aware that also means that we're going to have additional cases coming out of prison in our community that our department is going to have to provide supervision and accountability and treatment options for. So at the same time that we're getting the additional funding, we are also going to see an increase in high-risk, high-needs offenders coming out of prison at the same time. So,
Well, thank you for that. 1 second, please. Thank you for that report and that good news. And, we're just looking forward to the implementation now. So Commissioner Anderson.
So I don't know if it's a quick question, hopefully maybe is, but when they reduce the sentence they have to serve, does that increase cost for the county? Or is it kind of a wash? Because, say they're in the jail, which, still costs the county, and then they get switched to probation. Is that
No,
extra
so
cost?
this
or
is,
it about
yeah,
a
this is
wash?
where we talk about the differences in how we supervise and where we're at in supervised release between supervised release or probation. And it will actually increase the cost to the county having these cases out, because these cases would have been at the prison system. These aren't cases that would have been in our jail.
Okay.
They're gonna be coming out of the prison system, which is the state prison system. And they typically are our highest needs and our highest risk offenders that are coming out of that situation with the least amount of resources. So they are gonna take more resources from my department significantly in supervision and what we help them with when they
Okay,
come
so
out.
they're not the ones that are in our system?
No, well, they're in our system under our supervision
But under
because
a
we
state-
supervise,
but-
but not out of our jail.
Okay.
Commissioner Gardner?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Tammy Jo, that program has been characterized by some as a get-out-of-jail-free card. But there are things that they have to do while they're incarcerated in order to be able to qualify for an early release. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Sure, I can try. So this is a new program, just like everything else. We don't have all the details yet. The intention behind the program is that if somebody is sentenced, we'll kind of backtrack a little bit. If somebody's sentenced to probation, to prison, in the state of Minnesota, we're a determinate sentencing state. What that means is somebody is going to be sentenced, and I'm going to use this number just randomly to as an experience, trying to explain. If somebody's sentenced to 18 months in prison, the judge is automatically going to say, a lot of times our PSI, our probation officers figure that out, calculate it. But the judge is going to say, you're going to serve 18 months in prison. 2/3 of your time is going to be in prison, and 1/3 time is going to be out in the community. It's a truth in sentencing. It's automatic. That's where they end up, as long as they don't commit any new things while they're incarcerated that they lose their good time. What this new bill is going to do is it's going to say if you go into prison and you commit or you complete treatment options at the time of your, during your stay there, that you have the potential of being released at halftime. So now it's gonna be extremely complicated because now we're gonna go from a determinate sentencing state to a determinate indeterminate. So we're gonna have two different levels in the prison system. So there's a lot of unanswered questions of how this is going to work. The idea behind it, though, is that justice reinvestment piece that we've talked about before in terms of how we kind of wanted to do, is that savings that we see of those individuals not being in custody in the prison system is going to fund that treatment part. And so the way it's set up is it's going to be a portion of it goes to the prison system for treatment, so that we can increase, because right now we don't have treatment options. I would tell you a lot of the people that go to prison, we don't see the reason my staff have to deal with it is they don't have the option to complete that treatment when they're in prison. There's just not enough beds. There's not enough treatment options. There's not enough things going on. So we have to address it when they come out. The next piece of it, there's also funding that's going to go to victim services. And then there's funding that's going back into the general fund. So what they're saying is the dollars the state saves, they're going to reinvest into these different priorities. Needless to say, that doesn't come extra to us outside of our piece, but it will increase our requirements when they come out.
Commissioner Gardner? And then I'll come back to you.
Yeah, and just to follow up with that then, the presumption seems to be that this is something that they earn, and being able to receive treatment while incarcerated is, the hope is that when they're released, that they're able to better stand on their feet and better able to complete probation and be better able to re-enter civil society.
That
Is
is
that
the hope.
about right?
That is the hope.
Okay.
Commissioner Anderson?
Okay, so then at that 50%, when they reach that, who decides to let them out? Is it the state determines that, or does the county have any input on it? It's
We
just
won't
like,
have
here
any
you
input.
go.
It'll be determined at the state. I'm assuming they will set up essentially a parole board of some sort that will be a process. But again, that's all, the details haven't been all
Okay.
worked out. But yeah, I'm assuming that the way it's been described is that they will have a process to determine if somebody's done everything they were supposed to do to meet that requirement, and that and come out.
So if they don't cooperate and I'm not going to do any of that, they don't get out at that.
They don't get out at that time.
Okay.
And that's what they're assuring us, is they will not get out at that time. They would still get out at 2/3 because we're a truth in sentencing state, unless they do something wrong. And just so everybody, just so we make clear that some of the things that, when we talk about people getting out at 2/3 time, if they serve all of their sentence, they would come out with no supervision. So that's not a good option either. We don't want people released straight from prison with no supervision, no accountability, no assistance to get reintegrated back into the community. The time that we have, even if it's short, is where we start working with people to help them reintegrate and do things that they're supposed to do when they hit the community.
Did you have any?
Yes, Mr. Chair, yes, if I may, please. I'd just like to step back too. There's so many different components to your presentation today, and they're all good news. But really, the good news is where you started out talking about working for several years, and I know as a board, we talked to you about as well. Maybe this is going to be the year it's going to happen, that there's equal funding, equal fare, and equal funding for the three components of Minnesota Corrections Department. And it's so exciting in your leadership. You've been persistent. You have not let up working on that. I know there's other people that provided good leadership in too, but for Candioi County to have somebody like you with meeting on all these different committees and organizations and legislative testimony and so forth, you got it across. And I think that's awesome, and thank you.
Yeah, when the governor signs the bill, we're still just, after all
Yeah.
these years, we're still just kind of waiting.
But now, that part, if I understand right, is pretty close to sure. It's the funding part I wish was more dollars, of
Right.
course. We always wish there was more dollars and less county dollars involved in these.
I agree. There is one
Am I
other,
correct that, though, what I'm saying is that it looks like a done deal?
we have it, it's through,
I
we're
know
just
we
waiting for a
got 6 more
signature.
days or 5, yes.
I do have one other piece I forgot to mention, thank you, by the
Yeah.
way. Part of this bill also requires us to eliminate our supervision fees by August 2027. So that will be something else that we're going to start discussing. We do have time to discuss it, and we also are, as part of our discussions at the legislature, the idea that we may actually go back in and request additional dollars to supplant the fact that we're not going to be able to charge supervision fees anymore. So that is, it also does, so it's one of those things where we take 2 steps forward, 1 step back. In terms of funding, but I think it's still promising, and we're going to look at where, how we can go forward with making sure that we address that.
Thank you. So I want to reiterate what Commissioner Berg said about your leadership and work in getting this done. And AMC, Association of Minnesota Counties, it was our #1 priority this year. And I remember about a year ago, as we were beginning to work on our platform, we decided that probation funding would be our #1 priority, and we got just a couple more days to get over the top. So one of the things I want to point out, though, is what the legislature does, even though we're down advocating for one element or another in terms of the bills that are being considered, is they're going to do what they're going to do, and we have to live with the results of that. And so the early out, get out of jail card free, you're going to hear about it in cannabis too. Just wait on that one, because we've taken no position on cannabis, we as an Association of Minnesota Counties, but whatever comes out of that legislation, counties will have to deal with licensing and oversight and all of that. So if your constituents are frustrated with you or us about something that happened, send them upstream, because it's not us. So thank you again for the update.
One other comment. You did mention something I should have mentioned as well. When we talk about other leadership, we're lucky to have one of our commissioners on the AMC board that can help push some of these programs through as well. So thank you, Ms. Commissioner
Yeah,
Emdek.
you're most welcome. And we often hear about the rural-urban divide. The Metro was hugely involved in this, especially Ramsey County. And again, it's one of those things in county government. We all deal with the same issues, whether we're a county of several million or a county of a few hundred. We all have the same issues.
And I would agree with you, Mr. Chair, in terms of the fact that our committee included myself from Community Corrections and Catherine Johnson from Hennepin County. We were our Community Corrections representatives. And I would tell you that we often also have that metro-rural divide going around our table. And in this case, it was actually our metro representatives that were very strong, especially on that $150,000 base, because we almost lost that at one point in the negotiations. And even though it really made no difference to the metro counties, because $150,000 is, but it makes such a difference to the rural counties, they stood by us all the way in that process of understanding that this was really important to the rural. And so they kept the ball moving for us.
Very good. Thank you very much for the presentation, and I know, Val, if you accommodate us, we got a bunch of old men up here, we're going to take a 5-minute break.
Thank you.
I'm offended by that comment.
We'll reconvene the Kanawha County Board of Commissioners meeting, and up next is the Resolution 2023-21, True County Assessing. Please proceed.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, Commissioners. I am Val Savor. I'm the County Assessor. I'm here today to follow up the conversation regarding the True County Assessing. If you had any additional questions, or if you want to go ahead and vote on the resolution, that would be great. This would mean that for the 2025 assessment, that we will be, in 2024, we will be viewing all properties in the county, that the townships and cities would no longer levy for the cost of the assessing, that all of the assessing, our assessor's office would be levied by the county. And this would mean that this would be an increase in our levy by approximately $422,000, but there would be no additional cost to the taxpayers. In turn, if the townships lower their levy, we increase ours for the cost of the assessing services, because we will no longer be collecting that money from them. And so basically, that is the outcome of the resolution. And if you had any questions, I will take them now.
I do have one question. You covered it last time. I just want to make sure that I understand it and that the public does. So a township, for example, that is using an outside assessor right now, and they might be spending $15,000 a year to get their assessing done, they no longer will have that cost, will they?
Right, they would
That's
no longer
going
have
to
that.
be spread out over the entire tax base of the county.
Well, yes,
Yeah,
yes.
okay, great. All right, so you've heard, we have two options here today. I have a thought on what I would prefer on this one, is that, Val, as she said, let's get our questions answered, but as she said, we can act on it today if we're ready, if we're not ready, and if you are, and that's what the board wishes, fine. But I had a conversation yesterday with a township officer, and they meet today. And so there's a little bit of sentiment, I think, from some of the townships that this sort of got dropped on them, if you will, that they didn't have a say-so in the matter. And as we talked about it, he says, I know we're not going to mind writing out that check. He says, I just wrote it out last week. But I just want them to feel like they had the opportunity to give us feedback. And so there is no urgency for this to pass, or is there, Val?
Well, we do need to pass it prior to doing our 2024 assessment.
Which is in?
Which we're working on, we're going to start now. And they typically sign contracts with the local assessors for typically July 1st, I believe, is their contract dates. And so we would have to have this in place, because the implementation of this would be the second assessment past the signing of the resolution.
So if we did it in the first meeting in June, would be okay yet, or
Yes.
does that make a hardship for you?
No, that would be fine.
Okay. All right, so, but if the board wishes and ready to move, that's your prerogative. Our prerogative, I should say.
So you'd like a motion to table it?
I'm suggesting that we,
Mr. Chair? Yes, I so move that we table this to June 1st.
okay, we have a motion to table this to time certain of June 1st for resolution, or is it June 1st, is that the date? First meeting in June.
First meeting in June.
First
yes.
meeting in June.
Thank you.
Time certain of the first meeting in June. Do I hear a second?
I'll second that, Mike.
Commissioner Dwayne Anderson seconds. Now, I would like the opportunity for anybody to ask any questions that you
Certainly.
had regarding this. So before I ask for the vote, I'm going to open the floor to questions or discussion.
Yep, I have, sorry.
Commissioner Gardner, you go ahead.
Oh, okay. So I missed this. You mentioned when it would take effect if we implemented this resolution. When would the townships that are doing it on their own, when would that end?
It would actually end, so it would be for the 2025 assessment, which is done in 2024. So we would start assessing next spring after boards would be when we would start doing assessing.
Okay, so it'd be next year, basically?
Yes.
Okay.
All right, Commissioner Gardner?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Val, you'd indicated in the presentation last time that one of the main drivers for this is that one of the local assessors is going to be retiring,
Yes.
and the other one just does 2 townships, or do I have it reversed?
No, that's correct.
Okay, so realistically, that's more of a driver than anything else for doing this, yes?
Well, they would have the opportunity to hunt to see if they could find another assessor that would take on those districts, and those are very large districts. The Irving Township and Lake Andrew Township are both very large districts, so it would take somebody that wants to take on a pretty big task.
And so realistically, you know, that accounts for less than probably around 15% of the total assessing that's done in the county. To me, it makes sense that the county just take it over, date certain, and be done with that. I'm okay with moving the conversation to June 1st if we think we need more input from those townships. Is that the intent of the request?
Yes. From my perspective, yes.
Yes. Okay. And then I would ask Val if she has heard anything from those townships one way or the other.
No, I have not. I did talk with all of the districts that have local assessors when we were there for their Board of Appeals. And so they did know that this was coming up. And I did talk to them about why we felt that this would be important and why we felt that, you know, moving to True County was a good option. And like we told them that it's not a change in cost for the taxpayer. It's just where we're going to levy the dollars.
And the message that I got yesterday was that they understood it. And you got to remember, some of these township boards only meet once a month.
Correct.
And so this individual mentioned that though they had been prepped on this in the past, they only heard about it at our first meeting of the month, that this was coming up. So as long as there's no harm done, I think we're making the right decision here. Any
That's-
other questions or comments?
That's fair enough.
Yep. Then we will vote. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. And I don't know if you're going to want the assessor to come back to next month's meeting, or if we could just put it on, but
Yeah, that's fine.
somebody has to present the resolution.
Yep, I can do that.
Thank you very much.
All right,
Appreciate
thank you.
it. Okay, well, thank you for your patience. Joe, please come up and state your name and who you represent. We're going to have the presentation and update on the Summit Carbon Solutions.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Joe Caruso. I work with Summit Carbon Solutions on public affairs and community outreach in Minnesota. And it's a pleasure to be back in front of you again. I think this is our third meeting with the Canada County Board. And my purpose this morning is just to give a brief update presentation. A number of the slides I have, you will have seen before, either at a board meeting or at a public meeting. And my focus will be on what's new. So it's a little bit of reminder, reset, but also more what's new. So just as a reminder, Summit Carbon Solutions has partnered with now 34 biofuel plants. So part of what's new is we've added 2 additional commercial partners on a system, one of which is a traditional ethanol plant, one of which is kind of an interesting take on ethanol. It's the company that's developed a process to make aviation fuel out of ethanol, and that's a company called Gevo, which we'll talk about in a minute. The project is designed to gather, compress, transport, and permanently store up to 18 million tons a year of carbon dioxide. And the essence of the project is really to support the ethanol industry, both from an environmental standpoint and a financial standpoint, and thereby enhance the long-term outlook for the ag economy in the 5 states that we operate in. The import of this map is twofold. One is a reminder of the overall footprint of the project. It covers 5 states, over 2,000 miles of pipeline. But the second thing that's more germane to Minnesota is we really don't have a continuous line in the state of Minnesota. And that has informed our permitting strategy. So in Minnesota, we have 3 segments of line. The northern line, which runs from Fergus Falls west, crosses the border south of Breckenridge, ultimately connects to the transportation system in northern South Dakota. We have a southern line that runs from Fairmont south to Superior, Iowa, where it connects with the rest of the system. It just so happens that both the northern line and southern line are each 28 miles long, coincidentally, and they each connect up to one Green Plains ethanol plant, Green Plains Fergus Falls and Green Plains Fairmont. The central line, which is what's germane to all of you, initiates in Atwater at the Bushmills facility, runs west, southwest, and then due south to the Iowa border, where it also connects to the rest of the system in Superior, Iowa. There's a large Green Plains ethanol plant in Superior, so that's a common connection point for these three lines. So the point is, these are three separate lines, not one continuous line. If you think of a conventional pipeline, it crosses the border at point A, it leaves the state at point B, and it runs continuously across that span. This is not that.
If I may interrupt you, Joe, further on in the presentation, there's going to be a map that shows it terminating at the Bushmills and Atwater, but this map in front of us appears that it terminates up at Little Falls. Is that?
This may be an older version of the map,
Okay.
right? It originates in Atwater.
Okay.
And the impact of that was, when I started working on the project in early 2022, we had 150 miles of proposed pipeline in Minnesota. And the addition of Atwater added 45 miles onto that total. So we went from 150 to 195 by adding one partner. And we went from 9 counties to 10 counties.
So there is no proposal to go from Atwater to Little Falls?
I'm sorry?
There is no proposal to go from Atwater to Little Falls, or maybe more important, from Little Falls to Atwater?
No, we're going from Atwater down to Granite Falls.
Yeah,
That's the
okay,
connectivity.
thank you.
Yeah. But that line is, the central line is a lot different. One, it's longer, it's 175 miles. And two, it sequences 4 plants on the same line. So we start out at Atwater with a 6-inch pipe, which is what runs through Kandiyohi County. By the time we get down to the Iowa border, we have a 10-inch pipe because of the volumes from the 4 plants. But the key part of this is what informed or what was behind our regulatory strategy of applying for 3 different permits for 3 different lines. So far, we've aggregated more than 9 million tons of capacity. It's actually closer to 10 right now. So we're just slightly over 50% of the design capacity. It's a pipeline that I think now extends more than 2,100 miles. We'll talk about that in a minute. And the essence of this from a project standpoint, a viability standpoint, is once the CO2 is gathered, compressed, converted into a near liquid state, transported, it ends up permanently stored, permanently sequestered in North Dakota. And that permanent sequestration is a key to the viability of the project, because that's what the federal tax incentives are tied to. It's the permanent storage, not the reuse. I wish I could take credit for this artwork. I can't. This is a schematic that was developed by the U.S. Department of Energy. And interestingly, DOE spent several years looking at publicly available geologic data across the United States to try to determine the potential sites for permanent carbon sequestrations across the United States. And they had a number of criteria they were looking at. The 2 that are on the schematic, first of all, is the reservoir, the storage reservoir. That's the bottom layer of the cake, if you will. That's important because that's where the CO2 will be permanently sequestered. And when I hear the word reservoir, I think of a large void space. I think of a cavern or a cave or something like that. This is not a large void space. Think of this as the sponge you might use on a Saturday morning to wash your car or truck. It weighs nothing when it's dry. You drop it in a bucket of water, it's 5 pounds coming out. And the reason is that water flows into those pores, the very porous sponge. This is a very porous layer of rock. Happens to be, in our case, in North Dakota, about 1.5 miles below the surface. But the other key attribute that DOE was looking for when they were cataloging potential sites was, in addition to the reservoir, in addition to the sponge, they were looking for places that had cap rock, because it does no good to put it down if it migrates back up, right? So the cap rock is significant. What's not on here is also a layer of bedrock. So think of this as a geologic sandwich. You have to have the 3 pieces: the bedrock, the cap rock, and the sponge, the reservoir. In our case, we've leased 135,000 acres, surface acres in North Dakota, and what are called pore rights, P-O-R-E, not P-O-U-R, pore rights, are analogous to mineral rights. So things on the surface will continue per normal, but a mile and a half below the ground is where the storage will take place. And we've drilled 3 monitoring and test wells so far to prove up the geology that we think is there. And that's part of the permitting process. The other thing about this slide is one of the questions that came out of our public meetings, I think including, if I remember right, here in Wilmer, is are we being a bad neighbor? We meaning Minnesotans. Are we being bad neighbors? Are we taking something we don't want, CO2, and dumping it on our friends in North Dakota? And there was a resounding no from not only the governor, but also a bipartisan group of leaders in North Dakota. They see the geology of North Dakota as a long-term asset. The way I put it is Iowa and Minnesota are blessed with some of the most fertile, productive farmland in the world. North Dakota happens to be blessed with some pretty cool geology. They've already gotten paid for cool geology once by monetizing the Bakken over the last 30 years. This has nothing to do with the Bakken. This is 50 miles away from the edge of the Bakken, but it's another set of geology that has a 250 billion tons of storage capacity. So Governor Burgum and a bipartisan leadership group in Minnesota see this as a really important long-term asset to develop for the state. We could do a lot of cool things from an engineering, construction, operating standpoint, but if we don't do it safely, this project is an abject failure, and we understand that. So we borrowed, if you remember, in the 90s, Ford Motor had a tagline that quality was job one. We borrowed that, and to us, safety is priority one. I'd also point out that while it is novel to Minnesota, there are no other CO2 gathering or pipeline systems in Minnesota. It's certainly not a novel concept globally or nationally or even regionally, because there are 2 CO2 pipelines in North Dakota that have been in operation for a while. In total, there are 5,000 miles of operating pipeline in the United States, going back to the early 70s. And most of those legacy pipelines were used for enhanced oil recovery. This has nothing to do with that. The sole purpose is to help ethanol decarbonize. And we're not proselytizing on global warming, and we're not taking a religious view of this. All we're saying is there's a big trend nationally and internationally to decarbonizing industry, whether it's ag, whether it's power generation, whether it's refinery, you name a carbon-intensive industry, everybody in those industries is looking to decarbonize. This is simply one strategy to help decarbonize ag. This is a little bit of a busy slide. I'm just going to focus on the yellow boxes. These numbers were just updated by University of Minnesota Extension. Last year, 2022, ethanol in the state contributed $2.7 billion of GDP and had 26,000 jobs associated with it. So it was a big part of the economy. And to put it in context, 40% of the corn crop in the U.S. goes into ethanol feedstock. In the case of Minnesota, it's closer to 50. So it's every other row of corn is going into ethanol here. I apologize for the profile of this map. It's hard to get a big map on a small slide. It looks squished, but the significance is the dark blue, black states, California, Oregon, Washington State, and British Columbia, all have in place and have had in place for some time low carbon fuel standards. All the Canadian provinces have agreed to replicate BC, and in fact, I think most of them already have, so this probably needs to be updated. And the US states in blue, including Minnesota, have fallen into the likely category of places to have low carbon fuel. The color that doesn't, it kind of washes out, that mustard color if you look at it carefully. Those are states that are still considering low carbon fuel. The point is, if you're an ethanol producer, at some point you're either going to be foreclosed from selling into those markets, or you're going to get less than premium pricing. And in a pennies per gallon business, bad pricing is not a good thing. So there are 2 revenue drivers for the project. I alluded to one earlier, the federal investment tax credits that come from permanently sequestering the CO2. The other revenue from the project is the premium pricing that the ethanol producers can get for low carbon fuel. And we share in those benefits with our partners. So this is another take on a map. This is kind of highlights the significance of the 3 lines, if you will. The only line that we're on file with the PUC is the northern line, or what's called in the PUC docket, the Otter Tail Wilkin project. We had our first round of public hearings the first week of May, May 2nd in Breckenridge, We had 2 sessions in Fergus Falls on May 3rd. As it turns out, the Department of Commerce does all the research and analysis for the PUC on project permitting. So the Department of Commerce ran the meeting. There was a PUC person in attendance. We had about 20 people in Breckenridge and about 25 or 30 in each of the Fergus Falls meetings. So, and the docket is still open for public comment through this week. There was also a virtual meeting on the 3rd day. I don't know how well that was attended. We are likely to file a permit on the southern line, which is coming out of Fairmont, going down to Iowa this quarter, so probably by the end of June. And then the central line will file hopefully sometime later this year. And it looks to be about a 12 to 18 month permitting cycle. Assuming we are permitted, we'd expect to get that permit in April or May of next year, start construction immediately on the Fergus Falls to Wilkin line, Otter Tail Wilkin line, and be in service with that line by the end of 24 or very early in 25. These dates are only relevant to that line, though. We haven't filed for any permits anywhere else. I'm going to skip this slide. It's old and it's busy. Just a couple things from here. Again, I think you may have seen this at one of our public meetings, but we crossed over $1 billion of equity raised for the project. It's a 4.5 to 5, probably closer to $5 billion project because of the growth in the line. The other thing was significant last year, besides adding Bushnell's Atwater here locally, was we partnered with Minn Kota Power Cooperative. Minn Kota is a rural electric cooperative that has its own coal-fired generating plant that they wanted to decarbonize. So again, go back to carbon-intensive industry, power generation is right at the top, right? Coal-fired plant. They went out and developed and got permitted their own sequestration facility in North Dakota. And they have way more capacity than they need for their own needs. They've agreed to let us use their storage capacity if ours isn't permitted in time to turn on the pipeline. So that's just a great optionality, kind of think of it as an insurance policy, because we're trying to coordinate 3 construction paths. We're building compression stations at all the ethanol facilities. That's a $25 to $30 million spend at 34 plants. We're building the gathering system in the pipeline, and then we're building the sequestration facility. So if you're trying to sync those 3 activities in time, to have the optionality of using someone else's storage is a real benefit. As you may recall, last year was a year of outreach for us. We hosted 15 public meetings in 11 different venues, including here in Wilmer. We had close to 1,000 attendees, most of whom were landowners, because that's what the public meetings were focused on. But there were lots of citizens, lots of local elected officials. We had in-person meetings with all 10 county boards at least once, in many cases twice. We were at AMC, which was great for us for the first time because it gave us a chance to see a lot of people in a concentrated format, and we'll be back there again this December. We hosted 2 meetings with the 10 county engineers, including Mr. Odens, with the intent of coming up with a common use and protection agreement between the counties and the company. So anything to deal with ditches, roads, road crossings, dust control, those sorts of issues. And that's moving along. We had some great meetings with watershed districts and rural water authorities. And then on the PUC front, the PUC expects any state agency that has skin in the game, meaning some domain expertise about the permitting process, to weigh in. So the ones that were kind of at the top of the list are Department of Health, because they're responsible for public drinking water, DNR is obvious, and then DOT. So we had meetings with all of those groups. We also briefed most of the legislators in our 10 county footprint. And then we because of something that happened at Candiota, 2 things happened at Candiota that were different. One, Mr. Odens came up with the idea that it would be good for us to speak at the township officials meeting in September. And we didn't know there were township official meetings, so it was A, good to know, and B, a very efficient way to get in front of a large group of township folks. So we did that in September. The other thing that happened a month later is the Wilmer Chamber of Commerce, their ag business and their policy committees had a joint lunch meeting and asked us to present on the project. And there were probably 35 people in the conference room at the bank. It was a fantastic meeting. People were very engaged, a lot of good questions. It was probably one of the best meetings we had last year. And then more on a community outreach, we participated in Farm Fest. We did a one-off at the Jackson County 4-H, which I'll come back to, and we were at the Minnesota State Fair, could have on the coattails of the Jackson 4-H. We did all of that because one landowner asked us to with the 4-H. This year we said, let's take a different approach. Let's sponsor all 10 county fairs, which we're in the process of signing up to do, and let's sponsor all 10 4-H county groups and not do the blue ribbon auction. Blue ribbon auction is great, but it benefits mostly one person, the owner of the animal that wins, and to a lesser extent the chapter. We want to do something that reaches more people and is more, call it egalitarian, if you will. So we're in the process of doing that as well. We would have been very foolish if we'd have spent all the time and money we did on those meetings to not have listened and learned. So we did listen and learn. I'm not going to go through all of these. There were probably 3 key listening and learnings. The first one was very early on. And this was more acute in the southern part of the state, and it went to eminent domain. We have eminent domain in Iowa. We do not have eminent domain in Minnesota. And the temperature dropped in those meeting rooms by 10 degrees. Once everybody understood eminent domain's not on the table, we don't have eminent domain in Minnesota. So that was an easy one to deal with. Second one was drain tile. Every landowner, every single landowner that came to every single meeting was concerned about drain tile. And public officials were concerned about county drain tile. So at the very beginning of the project, we retained Ellingson Companies as our drain tile contractor. Ellingson's a Minnesota company, considered to be one of the top experts in drain tile in the United States, and they are involved with us from the get-go. And the import of that is, if we break something, we fix it. That's part of the easement. Every easement contract has that in it. That's our obligation. And we have voluntarily decided to warrant anything we break and fix for the life of the project. No one else in the industry has done that. No one else in the pipeline industry does that. Well, if we're going to take the warranty liability, we better get it right, better get the fixing process right. So having Ellingson involved up front is helping us determine where the drain tile are. Some landowners have incredibly detailed GIS maps of their systems. Other people will say, you know, well, Grandpa put this in about 100 years ago, and we kind of know where it is. So that's a pretty big spread. Ellingson has techniques for trying to help determine where those unknown lines are, mostly aerial surveillance. So having them involved help us document and map those, and then document and map the fixes is really important. And so that was the second thing, and that lowered the temperature another 5 degrees in the room. The one that came up, the third one that came up often is one we already talked about, and that's operational safety. A group, and this is a mouthful, the USDOT Pipeline Hazardous Materials Safety Administration, FSMA, people in the industry call it, is the governing body for design, material selection, construction, operating protocols. So when it comes to safety, it's a one-stop shop. And they haven't come to Minnesota, but the Iowa Senate asked them to come give a presentation on pipeline safety, which they did a month ago, and is apparently very well received. So we've already talked about permitting. The short takeaway here, one line is in permit process. We're probably halfway through on the clock. We've had our initial public hearings, and EIS is being developed. And we're likely to file Martin County next, sometime this quarter. This is Kandiyohi County map. Now this map was this is as of January 1st, so it's 3 or 4 months out of date. Because Atwater was the last partner to sign up, this is still kind of a clean slate. I mean, we've had a number of people in Kandiyohi sign easements, but you always start out with as straight a line as you can, right? The shortest distance between 2 points is a straight line. Well, there are counties that are really zigzagged, and they're zigzagged for a couple reasons. Our process for easements was a survey process and an involuntary negotiation. And the survey had 3 components. Topographic, is the land what the map says it is? Second was cultural. Are there any attributes on the land that are culturally sensitive that we shouldn't build over? And then environmental. Are there any environmental attributes, a wetland, a protected species area that would cause us not to build? So if a landowner said, you know, let us on his property to survey it, we got a green light on all 3 of those, then we sat down and talked about the easement. If we got a red light and it was a serious enough red light, we would skip over. Or if the landowner said, that's great that I passed the survey test, but I'm still not interested, then we would pass over. So there are some counties that went from a really pretty arc to a sawtooth. And that sawtooth effect across the 10 counties in the state has taken us from 195 miles of pipeline to 235. So, consequence, right? But landowner without eminent domain has a right to say no.
Could I ask one question then? So this line, is that already, you have easements signed up, or you're hoping to get easements?
Statewide, we have 67% of the 10 county easements we need. In Wilkin, we're at 98%. I think I don't know, I don't have the figures handy for Kandiyohi, but I think it's right around 50
Okay.
signed. So 67% statewide. The range is, I think, 48 to 98.
Okay.
Big spread.
So this line could change still?
I would consider this, I think this line is a work in process.
Okay.
And now we have to essentially lock it down before we file with the PUC. So I think we were at 70% in Wilkin and 70% in Otter Tail when we filed with the PUC. And they understand we don't have 100, but 98 is pretty close in Wilkin County. I think we've got 2 parcels left to sign in Wilkin. One of the interesting phenomena, I don't know if it's true here, but so there was an attorney in Wahpeton and an attorney in Fairmont, both of whom had a number of landowner clients on both sides of the border, so Minnesota, North Dakota, and Minnesota, Iowa. And once that attorney was satisfied with the easement agreement, all of a sudden 10 or 12 landowners came in to sign the agreement. So it went from this one-on-one kind of thing to a different thing. And depending on the local situation, one attorney can bring to the table a dozen landowners. So that's all I have in the form of presentation. I'd be glad to take any questions.
Any questions of Joe? I'll just call on my inner former Commissioner Raleigh Nissen and point out a typo. In the bottom bar of that map, it says Yellow Medicine County, Minnesota pipeline mileage overview. Is that correct? Or were you meant to do and it says in the county of Kandiyohi? At least on ours.
The very last map?
Yep.
The very last map, that bottom bar right next to your logo, to the left of your logo.
No, the label in the middle is the right one. So,
Commissioner Nissen, if you didn't know, he would always find the typos and the mistakes in our stuff. So. Any other questions?
just to close, we are committed to in-person meetings in the second and fourth quarter. And we're going to do email updates like we did in January in the third quarter. So if that's sufficient, that's our plan for the year. But we would be, if anything comes up that you need to know about, please call. We'll get ourselves up here and do it in person if we need to.
Joe, did you bring any cards along?
I don't have a card.
Okay.
But I will make sure that Karen's got my contact information. I'll make sure that Kelsey has it as well. And I'll send all of you a thank you email with my contact on it.
All right. That'll be fine. Commissioner Gardner.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Joe, thank you for coming back to us today.
Yes, sir.
I had mentioned at the last time you were here when this map was presented that our lakes are not shown on this map. And so it's a little difficult to see where the anticipated pipeline is going to run in relation to those lakes. But it looks like they're going to come within a quarter to a half a mile of some of the lakes over in the southeastern part of the county. That would be concerning to me. And I guess as this process develops, I would ask that be noted on the maps so that people understand, because what you're dealing with in CO2 is not a benign product by any stretch of the imagination. In fact, there was just an article yesterday in agweek.com, which I believe is a forum publication, talking about some recent discussion in North Dakota where the ag commissioner talked about shortening the distance between shut-off block valves, which I think would be of interest to folks here, and also had gentleman brought in who was part of the emergency response to a CO2 pipeline leak back in 2020 in Cetaria, Mississippi. And he described finding a car with 3 people inside unconscious with foam around their mouths after breathing the CO2. The vehicle was still in drive but quit running because the carbon dioxide robbed the vehicle and the people of oxygen. So this is dangerous stuff. And I guess I would caution landowners and residents to ask enough questions so that they're going to be satisfied. I was happy to see that you're going to bury this below the frost line. It was either a typo or a misunderstanding of our geology here in Minnesota that it was not originally going to be buried that deep.
Well, the plan's always been to be at least 54 inches above the top of the subsoil. So during construction, once the topsoil is removed to trench or bore, so it's 54 inches below that, which is the state requirement. In some places, we're going to go deeper than that because of the weather and the freezing.
Sure. And just for information's sake here today, one of the questions that I had was, how wide are these easements going to be? And are they temporary or permanent easements?
So one of the slides, I think, speaks to it, but there are two easements, a permanent and a temporary. They're each 50 feet wide. Once construction is complete, the temporary easement goes away. But this is to move the soil and be able to do the trenching.
And there are crop interruption payments being made over the course of 3 years. But we know this is going to happen because, mistakes happen. What happens, what's the compensation to a landowner if that property does not return back to previous crop?
If by year 4 it's not back, we have to go back and do what we need to do to get it back. That's the contractual agreement in the easement.
All right.
So the 3-year assumption is year 1 is 100% loss or foregone crop production, 80%, 60%. Those are lumped together and paid up front. So as a landowner, you don't have to sit and wait for the passage of time to get those payments.
And finally, I did notice on one of the slides that it talks about the impact of it's equivalent to removing 3.9 million vehicles.
That's the whole system.
From the road.
That's the 5-state.
The entire system of, and how many miles was that, 2,000?
2,100 miles.
There are 285 million cars on the road in the United States right now. I would suggest that this might not necessarily be the environmental savior that it's being purported to be. I think it's an economic opportunity for certain companies to profit in this space, but my concerns revolve around certainly safety and sustainability. So, I'm not on board. I'm not a believer, but the process will continue because you're here for information's sake. We don't have any say in this process.
No, we're just trying to be as transparent and courteous as we can be and be communicating with the county boards on a regular basis, either in person or in writing. On the Satarsha case, the Satarsha, Mississippi accident in early 2020, there were several attributes about that were horrible. The first of all was the nature of the break. This wasn't somebody dinging it with a backhoe. This wasn't a pinhole leak. This was what's called a guillotine break. I mean, it completely broke. And the reason it broke was there was subsidence under the pipeline from heavy rains. Nothing was there to support it. No one had gone out to look to check what had happened before it broke. And it was a complete guillotine cut in the line. And so that was problem 1. Problem 2 was it wasn't just CO2. There was H2S, hydrogen sulfide in there, which was the green noxious cloud. If you read the stories from some of the press, there was a green noxious cloud. Well, CO2 is odorless and colorless. This is 100% CO2, so that's a different attribute than the Satarsha accident. And then the third thing, I think the most egregious thing was the company not giving timely warning to the first responders. There was a 45-minute delay between the time that guillotine rupture or the guillotine fracture occurred, and the first responders were formally notified. As a result, for all those things combined, the operator was fined $4 million for that incident. And there's a 300-page FSMA report out that goes into the detailed cause and effects of what happened. I mean, it was a bad situation.
But I'm sure you recognize that that's the type of thing that keeps folks like us awake at night.
And we expect FSMA to evolve some of its construction and material guidelines and operating guidelines from that. And some of those things that they've talked about doing, we already incorporated in our design without them being formally implemented by FSMA.
Did you have a question?
Yes, or comment, yes, I may, yes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think we're all in agreement that we don't want to see all this carbon dioxide released in the atmosphere, and we're trying to do something about it from an environmental point of view. There's not many options we have, and I'm very serious in looking at this option. I think this has very good possibilities. I think the concern is the safety going forward with this. But I think everybody's probably would say, yeah, this is not going to solve all the problems, or this is maybe just a big Band-Aid. But it is a Band-Aid versus just not doing anything. And I think we got to keep exploring this and look at safe ways and make sure it's is taking place. And I hear you're saying you're doing everything possible to see that make happen. And I personally want to hear more feedback as we go along and how we resolve those issues if possible for the safety of the people.
Well, and part of it is it's novel. This is a novel concept for Minnesota. And we're the first one here, and for some period of time we'll be the largest in the world. But we're not going to be the last one in Minnesota for sure. We're not going to be the last one in the Midwest. And I guess the largest in the world will probably last for a few years, but not forever. So this is an industry that's emerging. It's a solution that's not an end-all be-all. It's just part of a transition process. And right now we're the missionary, right? So we've got a lot of, as Ricky Ricardo used to put out, a lot of splaining to do.
I guess a question I have is, has there been any look, I know you said that you guys aren't by the Bakken, but is there still people looking at using this for fracking, or is it not an option at all? Has that already been decided?
It's a use option, but it's not an economic option, because if you do that, you forego all the investment tax credits.
Oh, okay.
Because the federal investment tax credits are tied to one thing: auditable permanent sequestration. So you've got to demonstrate that it's in the ground and it stays in the ground. Otherwise, the ITC goes back to the feds. So you're on the hook for the ITC. So is it physically engineering possibility? Absolutely. It's a reuse case. And there are people reusing CO2. Even in the state of Minnesota, there was a ethanol plant that was talking with us about joining the system, but they had a pre-existing arrangement where they were selling CO2 to a dry ice plant that was adjacent to the ethanol plant. Well, and there wasn't enough CO2 left to make the pipeline economic. So there are industrial uses for CO2. There are people working on looking at CO2 to make bricks and other building materials. It's not commercial. But this is just one piece. This is not an end-all be-all solution.
So
one other thought, I'm not presenting, but the company is presenting at the Partners in Ag Conference here in Wilmer in July. So I don't know if anyone attends that, but it's Partners in Ag Innovation, I think is the formal title of the conference. And the Chamber is one of several co-sponsors. It's at the technical campus here. So we will be back to Wilmer for that, but we'll be communicating electronically in the third quarter to the board.
So one of I'm curious, what is the material? What is the pipeline material made of?
Carbon steel.
Carbon steel, as opposed to poly. Poly wouldn't handle it.
No pressure. We're running between 1,200 and 2,100 psi.
Which kind of leads me to the second question. That seems like a lot of energy. 2,100 pounds of pressure. Is there any way to capture any energy off of this?
Well, the operating pressure is closer to 1,200, but the design capacity is up to 2,100. The biggest energy use on the project are the compressors at the ethanol plants to convert gaseous CO2 coming off the fermenters today. Fully permitted, I mean, it's being emitted on fully permitted. This is a way of redirecting it. and you're turning it into a near liquid. And there's some big compressor sets because you got a lot of volume of CO2 coming off those fermenters at these plants.
And what happens to the heat off of those compressors?
Cooled by water cooled. So we're going to have an incremental water use at the plant site. It'll be, 5 to 10% of the current usage rate at the plant site. But there'll be water, there'll be a cooling pond, that sort of thing. They're big compressor sets. And it's 20, in our commercial arrangement with the ethanol partners is we're front-ending the capital cost of the compressors, and we will operate and maintain those compressors inside the plant gate of the ethanol plant.
Fascinating. Any other questions or comments?
There is one other water use question that has come up. So there are two uses of water associated with the project. One is a single one-time use to hydrostatically pressure test the line. And that's not a lot of water. The recurring use of water is between 5 and 10% of the current use rate at the plant site. And that's for cooling compressors.
All right. Well, thank you very much for
Thank
taking
you.
the time to come and visit us. We appreciate it. Look forward to the next update.
Thank you. I'll see you in the fourth quarter, if not AMC. So.
Okay.
So I think that brings us to the end of our presentations. We'll move on to administrative updates, appointments, calendars, and report out. So Administrator Baker, you're up.
So I have on there a reorganizational chart, if you want to pass it down. But really, there's no reorganization. After the county recorder had retired, we took some time just to reevaluate, and that's why you had just approved. We had Julie Munson as the interim recorder, and we moved her to the recorder. So I just wanted to kind of go over the structure of these departments at our downtown office. So we have our auditor treasurer that is still overseeing the license bureau. That's a supervisory level position, and so that is the same thing that we did with the recorder position. So instead of being a department head, they're a supervisor, and they oversee their department then as well. And then underneath the auditor treasurer, you have your chief deputy, and then your chief financial officer. And so we've kind of looked at this moving towards more of a property and financial department, maybe a renaming in a few years. But the purple, those employees typically do the payroll and then the AP software, so the bills that are emailed out to you. And then in the blue, they do a mixture of financial and property. So some of the duties in there might be working with Lauren Engelby on the ditch accounting, the parks accounting, elections, those types of duties, assessments, valuations. They work with the staff. And so we're kind of working on it. So there's no changes, just more we're trying to clearly define what's financial duties, what's property, and putting people with their strengths in those duties. And so really no changes to how it functions already. So just more of an update.
Okay. Is that it? Or
Yep.
do you have any other updates?
No.
All right. Then, does anybody remember who started last month?
I did.
Okay. That didn't take long. So Commissioner Gardner, you get to report out first.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, I think. Somewhat busy. We had a recent Candido High Renville Community Health Board meeting, and we're looking, we did a little reorganization with appointing Sarah Benson from Renville County as the basically the lead person on the health board from the administrative side. And of course, we will be adding our, eventually adding our new Health and Human Services Director to that body as well. Had a nice meeting with some folks from EDC and Convention and Visitors Bureau. Commissioner Imdek was with us as well, and we had a discussion regarding shared opportunities and responsibilities, and discussed a little bit of funding in that regard. I was able to attend the Bethesda Grand groundbreaking. Say that 3 times really fast. For their newest project, they're adding about 17 or 18 beds on the east side of their building, just past the main entrance. And you know, that's, I mean, I can, EDC joint ops sat in on that again as the liaison. And I think for the moment I'll just stop there, because there's really nothing of great importance to report out.
Thank you, Mr. Gardner. Commissioner Dwayne Anderson.
Okay, yeah, so I just had a couple meetings in the last 2 weeks. One was Veterans Advisory Board meeting. That was right after our last regular county board meeting. And I really don't have a whole lot to say about it. It was my first one since I was elected county commissioner that I met. The first one I missed, and Commissioner Gardner, he took my place for that meeting. But anyway, I guess we talked about a whole range of things, and I found out a lot of stuff. And one was when we were talking about cemeteries and finding out that abandoned ones are the county's responsibility. And there's a couple in the county that we probably have to look into and find out if we have to take over on those that are in that really need to have some mowing and different things done with them. And then just chatting with those people, it was kind of fun. You know, I've never been a veteran. I at one time I did want to join, but my parents talked me out of it. And but so I have just great respect for those people, and please remember those that have fallen before us. You know, defending this country, and that's on Memorial Day weekend. The end of May. It isn't just a holiday. It's something to remember those people. The other meeting I had was last Thursday. I had a pre-construction meeting, and it was about County Road 119 that's coming up here. It'd be right along the south side of Lake Wakanda, I believe is how you pronounce that lake. And it's a good project. I think that's going to be happening, and that's an area that when I was door knocking, there's a lot of curves, and after a while you wonder which direction you're going and where you are. And so this will kind of make it a lot better. It's just a bunch of gravel roads there right now, and it's going to make a nice road. And I think the people along there are really going to appreciate it. And that's about it there, I guess, as far as my reporting.
Thank you, Commissioner Anderson. Commissioner Dale Anderson.
Just a couple things. My Chippewa watershed meeting got canceled. So really the only big one I had was I went to the Middle Fork of the Crow River meeting. It was my first meeting there. Kind of missed the other one. Roger and me have a joke. So I actually only went to Bruton thinking it was the Middle Fork, and that's the North Fork. So I missed that meeting the month before. But I was really impressed with that meeting. They've got a lot of things going. They're looking for projects. I know they met with the city of Belgrade for doing some stormwater runoff projects up there. They've got a project with New London that they're doing for stormwater runoff. So I was really impressed with that group. They're kind of a younger group of people that have ambition and have a desire to help with water quality and the things on that Middle Fork of the Crow River. So I was impressed. That was my biggest thing. I did listen in with the Prime West meeting on the way home from another meeting. But I'll let Corky talk about that.
Okay. Well, thank you. On the 3rd, I had a Hot Creek project and a Hot Creek One Watershed Plan meeting. It took up most of the day. And you already heard the report on the One Watershed Plan, other than it was a very good meeting, good exchange of dialogue between everybody, and everybody left there feeling really good. in the direction we're going. And also Hot Creek Project, as you all know, is overseeing the administration of the One Watershed Plan. And yet they're the Hot Creek Project, and that's a separate organization. And they're doing well too. And they're looking at some other grants and not knowing how they would do. It looks like there's still a need for that type of service and additional funding coming into our 3 counties. So it was two really good meetings. I had a Prime West meeting. It was, again, almost an all-day meeting, and a very good meeting. There was a lot to go over there, and so many details not to, from the board's point of view, probably to report on. We did get an update and discussion about redistribution of funds, and there's a set amount for the counties. And County Administrator Ms. Baker is involved in this as well, and knows what's going on. And we're in the process. It's 17,000, I believe, that Candioi County will be receiving that in redistribution of the funds to use. And she is working on some needs on how we could go about that. You want to add anything more to that, or is that?
The additional staff would maybe be around the unwinding to help with that process. So that's what we're focusing on.
We are already getting payback for joining Prime West, so it's been a really very positive experience getting involved with that. I had a PAC-4 meeting, and that was in the building here for all the counties. We had a very good turnout, and really the focus of the meeting was to talk about ACEs, and we all probably well aware of the ACEs, and they had an excellent video and a discussion afterwards, and not a lot of detail other than I think it's a good focus to be focusing on the ACEs and what PAC-4 can do in that area. And then I had the 18 County Mental Health Consortium meeting in Marshall on the 12th, and things are improving as far as funding from the state coming. So we're feeling very positive about that. And also there's a lot of discussion about a contract for the host county contract and relooking at and redoing that. So that's something I'll be reporting more in detail at our next meeting. And that pretty well summarizes everything along there. I do want to share, though, last year I got from the Candioi County Fair Board, do we want a booth again? And last year, since nobody was up for official re-election or had an opponent, we had a joint booth, and this question, would we want to do that again and rent that same space? And then the question is, if we do want to do that, who wants to run with it this time? I'm more than happy to assist in doing that, but I was thinking maybe we want to do those occasionally on off years we don't have anybody running for re-election, and we don't this year. And if we do it, then maybe that's something we could kind of rotate who organizes. Basically, I mean, I can take care of this, and Dale knows quite a bit about it, but I think it'd be a good idea, and I'd help out. But just really the schedule, who could be there and what days, and we don't have to be there, as you all know, every minute of the day neither, so.
Yeah, well, I'm all for using the experience that we have, just so you know.
I'll just
No. I think you missed the point.
I don't think I did.
I'll just say one thing about that. I'll only be here one day because one of my nieces is picked that weekend to get married. So I'll just be able to be there one day if we do a fair.
Okay.
Actually,
Well,
I think it was
attaboy.
beneficial for people to visit. It is difficult to get it all set up, and there's people better than us probably that can make it all look pretty and get all the right props and everything, but for this year.
But if we want to do this, I'd be happy to line it up.
Okay, and I'd be happy to work with you on it too, so.
Perfect.
All right. And then we can always count on Dale,
Yep.
since he's got to wear a couple of different hats there.
Yep.
So, well, good, thank you.
All right, well, thank you. The benefit of going last is a lot of things that we serve jointly on have already been covered, like
Yeah.
Community Health Board, EDC-CVB. I did have planning and zoning. Maybe the more significant part for me was I was at an AMC Futures meeting last week, and our speaker was unable to arrive. She was called to the floor for a vote or something like that. It was Representative Demuth from Cold Spring. And so the staff came down, the policy analyst came down and gave us the updates on probation was one of them. And so great to have that go over the finish line. But also updates on cannabis and transportation and bonding. There's still a lot of work to be done this week, and people, you potentially could get called, probably not, but potentially you could get called to go down here yet this week and help carry out a message on legislation that isn't fully developed or completed, like in conference. So one of them is the cannabis bill, which you see in the news almost every day. And again, I'll reiterate, we will have little say-so other than our advocacy in how this shapes up. But once it's there, we're going to be quite involved in terms of the licensing and the number of licenses required per county. It's going to be a population-based thing. But one of the things that's coming out of that is the 8 or 10% tax that is going to go on cannabis. Counties are going to get 20% of that, whatever they end up at, which is the first time probably in history that they had a carve out that went directly to counties. So that was considered a pretty big win. AMC took no position, and we made it very clear to not take a position for or against. Then transportation is still a work in progress. One of the things that's probably a little frustrating is that with all the additional money that we have in the state, there's certainly some capacity for doing some transportation projects, but the transportation funding, that means the ongoing funds that go into a big pot of money for maintaining what we have is still running short. And in Kaneohe County alone, it's $2 million a year that we're running short of funding. The state of Minnesota is $450 million. So there's a challenge with that one because of the surplus. Some people are not going to support it. The bonding bill, of course, needs the supermajority. We have things in the bonding bill that affect us. The Glacier Lakes Trail, which I think is still in the bill, but also the funding for the Glacier Lake Sanitary Sewer and Water District. If the bonding bill doesn't pass, then the cost of that upgrade at $13 million is going to be completely on the system. So I know there were some people went down there a week ago tomorrow to advocate for that, and they felt like they were pretty productive. So other than that, just a reminder that June 9th is the district meeting at, I think they still call it Max's in Olivia, attached to the sheep shed. So that will be at, I believe, 8 or 8:30 in the morning. So, Commissioner Gardner.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Before we go, I don't want it left unsaid that that district meeting will be your last meeting as the district chair, and your term ends on that. And I just want to thank you for all of your hard work and your advocacy on behalf of all of us, commissioners and all counties across the state, doing that work alongside the great people at AMC.
I appreciate
Just want to
that.
thank you and tell you that we appreciate you.
Thank you. I think AMC, no credit to me for this, but AMC is in a different spot than it was even 3 years ago, in that through COVID and the distribution and the management of the funds that came down from the federal government through the state of Minnesota, and then so the CARES Act, the ARP, I think they developed an incredible relationship with the governor's office and the legislature as a institution that really understands what's important at the local level. And if you see our policy analysts, you won't believe how busy those guys are. They're up at the Capitol yet at 10:30 at night, testifying, answering questions. So if you know who the analysts are, they're led by Matt Hilgart. Be sure to give them a note of appreciation for their hard work. So, all right. Well, thank you for that, and
Yes, thank you.
we will be adjourned.